Hey, it's Andrew here, and I'd like to take a brief look at what went on behind the scenes in making the theme music for the game The Little Vikings. We'll start from the earliest form of the theme and look at how it evolved to its final state. So in talking with the creators of this game, it was decided very early on that we wanted the theme to be almost like a song, say like you would have in a musical, or just something that is very singable, very memorable, and something that's simple in form, almost like a pop song, as I said. And so it started in its simplest form as just a couple chords on the piano and a distinct melody. And the melody went something like this. So once that idea was approved, we worked on creating a phrase out of that. We worked on creating basically a sentence, a full idea. So after the main theme, which it repeats twice, it goes on to the B section of the theme, which sounds like this. And then it builds on that and gets a little bigger. And then it moves into the C section, which is really a bridge, and then it moves back into the outro. So once we've created a full melodic idea, we worked on creating the whole form, and we came up with a piano version, basically, that sounds like this. So that's the A theme, and then the B section comes in. So after the theme was more or less locked in place, harmonically and melodically, we moved on to the orchestration process. And there were a couple of initial concerns. One is that while this is a game about Vikings, it's not going to end up sounding distinctly Viking like we think of in Western cinema. It's kind of darker, heavier, more intense. But there are elements of Northern European folk music that are very much more whimsical, much more lighthearted, a lot of winds, a lot of plucked instruments, but all within the context of the orchestra and orchestral samples specifically that I use. So I started with very plain, clear iterations of the theme, and it sounded a little bit like this. So as you just heard, we had A, and then we had a repetition of A, structurally speaking. And the second A had a little bit more layering to it. And so it gave it a more full sound, more stringed, like violins, for example. The string section is a little bit more present in the second half, and that gives it a very warm, round sound. When you have the string section playing, it's such a large section, especially even just the violins, violin 1 and 2. It's so much bigger compared to the rest of the orchestra, and it has such a distinct timbre that when you introduce the strings into your music, it really begins to bring the orchestra alive, and there's a lot of resonance. And so that's what I did there. Anytime I use strings distinctly and clearly, it's to create a body that sometimes other instruments don't necessarily give. There's a reason why the strings are considered kind of the backbone of the standard orchestra, and it's exactly that. The next section is the the B section of the theme, and it's really just kind of a continuation of the phrase, a continuation of the ideas. It's like a sentence. Good melodies, they rise, they fall, and they have clear diction, not in the sense that we think of diction like words, but it says what it's trying to say, and it says it in a way that is coherent and cohesive. It doesn't beat around the bush, so to speak. So I'll go ahead and play that for you, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So for the first half of the B section, the strings doubling a few woodwinds were the backbone of the theme. Very clear, very precise. It wasn't buried behind layers and layers of sound. Again, I'll say what I said before. We wanted the melody to be clear and memorable, and so to get that point across in your orchestration, it needs to be at the foreground. So what's going on in the background is something to note, rather, is that for the bass end, the low end of the sonic spectrum in terms of frequencies, the only instruments I have on the bottom of the orchestra, at least significant instruments, are the basses and cellos down here playing, and low frequencies stand out in a mix as well as live music, and you don't need lots of low frequencies to feel the bass line. I have a couple other instruments doubling them, but they're pulled way back in this particular mix. This isn't the final mix. This is what I happen to put together for this video. But remember that as you orchestrate. If you want the melody to stick out, make sure you've cleared out the palette underneath. And oftentimes, if you're going to have build-up and kind of colliding frequencies, so to speak, it's going to be in the bass section. So keep your bass very simple, very clean. I use pizzicato because it has a sharp attack, and then it has a distinctive attack, and then there's not a lot of trail except in the natural room and the natural reverb. And so it gets out of the way, but it says what it needs to say. So it's spoken in the samples, and then it's heard. For the second part of the B theme, this is supposed to be the height of the piece. It's kind of like an arch. It starts slower, gets bigger, 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 and then it fades out over time. It creates an arch, and it creates a feeling of completion. There's a clear starting point, and there's a clear ending point. And so this is about right in the middle of the piece, more or less. And this is the height of the piece, as I said. This is where the full orchestra is more or less all being played at the same time. And that's what gives it its roundness. You can't just crank up volume dials or automation or whatever to give something a big sound. If you want to orchestrate in natural volume, natural dynamics, simply start filling out the sections of the orchestra to where everybody's contributing to the sound. And that's what creates a sense of volume. Another key element to create the big sound was the use of the choir. It's very subtle. It's really actually just sopranos singing. It's not a full choir. And they're a little bit in the background. They aren't doing anything in particular. They're more or less mirroring some of the other chords, but it creates a new resonance, a new set of frequencies that enter the mix, that cut through. It's a new timbre that you haven't really heard. At some point, I used a choir, well, two different choirs, but they were a soprano choir. One of them was a humming sound, just a natural sampled hum, and the second hum I actually pitched up and then played it transposed. So it sounded like little children singing, or like little elves. Like it just more sounded like little children. So those are little tricks you can do. But for these choirs, these were just pretty standard sopranos singing. And I just, as I said, I just voiced some of the other chords that were already present between the parts, and I just doubled. Final point is to create a full orchestration. Doubling your instruments is very important. For instance, I double the cellos and the French horns on some of the melodies. I like to double the strings, and the flutes specifically. I like to double the harp and the celeste, sometimes the harp and the piano, sometimes the harp and the woodwinds. Any of those doublings you do create a new sound as opposed to just having one instrument playing a note or phrase. Doubling in the right spot can be incredibly effective to get a point of a melody or anything that you're trying to do, to get it to sit out in the mix or sit out in the orchestration. All right, so that is a brief walkthrough, a brief little behind the scenes of the main parts of the theme. I'd encourage you all to go check out the game. We're really proud of the work. The company I worked with here put so much time and effort into this. They poured their hearts into it, and they're really great people. And I'm very, very proud of the work they've done, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.